6 p.m., March 8, 1963. Cedar Falls residents went to bed. 6 a.m., March 9th, they woke up and began living March 8th again, but in reverse. Morning routines became evening routines. Work shifts ran backwards. Conversations flowed from conclusion to greeting. For 60 years, no one could explain why an entire town began living life upside down. Subscribe to the Ember Files, where time refuses to move forward. Cedar Falls, Oregon had always been unremarkable. Population 2,847,000, nestled in the Cascade foothills, sustained by logging and a small paper mill. The kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where the biggest excitement was the annual Harvest Festival, and where nothing unusual ever happened. Until March 8, 1963, when the impossible became routine. The first person to notice something wrong was Martha Sullivan, owner of Sullivan's General Store. She opened her shop at 7 a.m. on March 9th, expecting the usual morning customers. Instead, people were returning items they'd purchased the day before, asking for refunds, then leaving with the exact same merchandise they'd just brought back. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Martha called to her regular customer. Mrs. Patterson turned around, walking backwards toward the counter. "Goodbye, Martha. Thank you for the groceries." Martha blinked. "But you haven't bought groceries yet." Mrs. Patterson smiled, placed a bag of flour, eggs, and milk on the counter, then walked backwards out of the store. Martha stood frozen, trying to process what she'd witnessed. She checked her calendar twice. March 9th, 1963, Friday. But Mrs. Patterson had been shopping for Thursday's dinner ingredients, returning them on Friday morning, then taking them again. Across town, similar scenes were unfolding. At Cedar Falls Elementary, teacher Helen Morrison arrived to find her students already seated, hands folded, staring at the blackboard where yesterday's lesson was written in perfect script. "Good morning, class," Helen said uncertainly. In unison, the children replied, "Good night, Miss Morrison. Thank you for teaching us about fractions." Helen stared at them. She hadn't taught fractions yet. That was today's lesson plan. But somehow the children already knew the material, reciting answers before she asked questions, solving problems she hadn't written on the board. Little Tommy Henderson raised his hand. "Miss Morrison, may I please not ask you about the homework you won't assign us?" Helen felt dizzy. The question made no sense, but somehow she understood it perfectly. At the Cedar Falls post office, Postmaster Robert Chen was experiencing his own confusion. Mail trucks were arriving to collect letters that hadn't been delivered yet. Residents were coming to mail responses to letters they claimed to have received the day before, but the original letters were still sitting in the sorting room, waiting for delivery. "Mr. Chen," said elderly Mrs. Kim, backing through the front door, "I need to mail my reply to the letter my daughter will send me about her engagement." "But Mrs. Kim, your daughter's letter is right here. I haven't delivered it yet." Mrs. Kim smiled patiently. "I know. That's why I need to mail my congratulations now, so she'll receive them yesterday." The postal worker felt his understanding of causality crumbling. Dr. William Carter, the town's only physician, received a flood of patients that morning. Each one described symptoms in reverse chronological order, explaining how they'd felt better after treatment they hadn't received yet, reporting recovery from illnesses that hadn't started. "Doctor," said Farmer Bill Rodriguez, "I wanted to thank you for curing my pneumonia next week. The medicine you'll prescribe tomorrow worked wonderfully yesterday." Dr. Carter examined Bill Rodriguez. The man was perfectly healthy, but insisted he was suffering from pneumonia that would begin the following Tuesday. "By noon, Doctor." Carter realized the entire town was experiencing some form of temporal displacement. People were living their lives in reverse sequence, processing events backwards, but maintaining perfect health and rational behavior within their inverted time frame. The most disturbing case was at the Cedar Falls Cemetery. Groundskeeper Samuel Wright reported that fresh graves were being dug up from the inside, not by vandals, but by the deceased themselves, who were climbing out, brushing off dirt, and walking home to resume lives they'd finished living. "Doc Carter," Samuel said, his voice shaking. "Old Mrs. Henderson died Tuesday morning. She just walked past me carrying her coffin flowers, heading back to her house. Said she needed to undie so she could attend her own funeral properly." Dr. Carter found Mrs. Henderson sitting at her kitchen table, appearing decades younger than when she died, calmly preparing dinner for a husband who'd been dead for 10 years. "Good evening, doctor," she said, though it was 2 p.m. "Would you like some coffee? I'm about to unmake it." Word spread quickly in a town of 2,847. By evening, families were gathering to discuss the impossible situation, but their conversations ran in reverse. Conclusions first, then supporting arguments, ending with greeting. The Williamson family dinner that night encapsulated the surreal new normal. "Well, good night, everyone. "It was nice talking to you," said Father Jim, sitting down at the table. "Yes, we should definitely call the state authorities tomorrow," agreed his wife Karen, passing dishes of food to her children. "But what if they think we're all crazy?" asked teenage daughter Lisa, starting to eat her dessert. "Because the whole town is living backwards," explained 10-year-old Michael, finishing his main course. "Hello, family. How was everyone's day?" Jim concluded, as Karen began clearing dishes that hadn't been used yet. Outside the Williamson house, other families were having similar backwards conversations, their words flowing naturally in reverse sequence while their actions followed suit. Weather station operator Jim Patterson, monitoring atmospheric conditions from his station on the hill above town, recorded the most compelling evidence of the anomaly. His instruments showed impossible readings: temperature rising toward midnight, barometric pressure flowing backwards, wind patterns defying physics. But most significantly, his atomic clock, synchronized with the National Bureau of Standards, was running backwards while maintaining perfect accuracy. Jim called the National Weather Service in Portland. "This is Patterson at Cedar Falls Station. I'm recording impossible atmospheric data. My equipment shows time moving backwards." The supervisor in Portland listened patiently. "Jim, check your instruments. Equipment malfunction is more likely than time reversal." "Sir, I've checked everything 3 times. The data is consistent. Also, the entire town is living their lives in reverse sequence. People are aging backwards, having conversations backwards, doing their daily routines backwards." Long pause. "Jim, are you feeling all right? Have you been under stress?" Jim looked down at the town below, watching residents walking backwards down streets, cars driving in reverse, smoke flowing from chimneys back into houses. "Sir, I know how this sounds, but I need scientific personnel here immediately. Something is fundamentally wrong with causality in Cedar Falls." The National Weather Service logged Jim's report as a possible psychological breakdown and sent a replacement operator. When Dr. Elizabeth Hartley arrived from Portland 2 days later, she expected to find a delusional weather station operator. Instead, she found a town where time flowed backwards while everyone remained perfectly sane within their reversed reality. Dr. Hartley spent 3 weeks in Cedar Falls, documenting the phenomenon. She interviewed residents, recorded conversations, filmed daily activities, and collected atmospheric data. Her findings were unprecedented: an entire population experiencing temporal inversion while maintaining logical thought processes, social structures, and physical health within their backwards time frame. Most remarkably, residents could interact normally with outside visitors who were experiencing time forward. Conversations between forward time and backward time people were possible, though complex. "Hello, Dr. Hartley," Martha Sullivan said during one interview. "Goodbye, it was nice meeting you yesterday, but we just met today," Dr. Hartley replied. "Yes, that's why I'm saying goodbye now, for when we'll meet tomorrow, which was yesterday for me." Dr. Hartley's head spun, but the logic was internally consistent. She documented hundreds of such interactions, each one following backward time logic perfectly while defying forward time causality. Dr. Hartley's report to the University of Oregon was classified immediately. The phenomenon was deemed too disruptive to public understanding of physics to be released publicly. For 6 months, Cedar Falls lived in reverse. Residents aged backwards, undid their daily activities, and experienced life in rewind while remaining perfectly healthy and rational. Then, on September 15, 1963, at exactly 3:47 p.m., everything stopped. Weather station operator Jim Patterson, who had refused reassignment and continued monitoring despite official skepticism, recorded the moment when Cedar Falls returned to normal time. Temperature readings corrected. Barometric pressure normalized. The atomic clock resumed forward motion. In town, residents suddenly found themselves confused, disoriented, with memories of 6 months that felt like living in reverse. Most dismissed the experience as a collective dream or mass hallucination. Within a week, life in Cedar Falls had returned to normal. People resumed forward time routines. Conversations flowed from greeting to conclusion, and the cemetery remained properly still. But Jim Patterson's weather data remained archived at Oregon State University, documenting 6 months of impossible atmospheric readings that suggested time itself had flowed backwards over a small Oregon town. For 60 years, the data sat unanalyzed, dismissed as equipment malfunction or operator error. In 2024, Dr. Maya Chen, researching temporal anomalies for her dissertation on theoretical physics, discovered Patterson's archived weather reports. The data patterns were too consistent and complex to be fabricated or accidental. Dr. Chen drove to Cedar Falls to investigate. She found a town that looked exactly as it had in the 1960s, as if time had passed differently there. Buildings showed minimal aging. Residents appeared younger than their chronological ages. Even the cemetery had unusual properties. Graves from the 1960s looked decades newer than they should. Dr. Chen interviewed elderly residents who remembered the backwards period. Their accounts were remarkably consistent, describing 6 months of reversed causality with perfect recall of impossible events. "I remember growing younger," said Sarah Mitchell, now 91. "Not physically, but experientially. I lived my Tuesdays in reverse, starting at bedtime and ending at dawn. It felt completely natural at the time. Most intriguingly, Dr. Chen discovered that Cedar Falls still experienced minor temporal irregularities. Clocks occasionally ran backwards for brief periods. Residents sometimes spoke sentences in reverse order. Weather patterns occasionally defied atmospheric physics. In the basement of the old weather station, Dr. Chen found Jim Patterson's personal logs preserved by his daughter after his death in 1987. The final entry, dated September 15, 1963, read 3:47 p.m. Temporal inversion has ceased. Cedar Falls returning to forward time progression. Note for future researchers, the reversal was not random. Analysis of barometric pressure patterns suggests external manipulation. Something was controlling the time flow, conducting an experiment on an entire population. Equipment readings indicate artificial temporal field generated from underground source. Recommend investigation of subsurface structures. Dr. Chen organized a ground-penetrating radar survey of Cedar Falls. The results showed an extensive underground facility beneath the town, constructed in the 1940s, with technology that didn't match any known engineering from that period. Access tunnels were found beneath the old weather station, leading to chambers filled with equipment that appeared to be designed for temporal manipulation. In the central chamber, Dr. Chen discovered a massive device that her team identified as a prototype temporal field generator, powerful enough to affect an entire town's relationship with causality. The device bore the markings of a classified government project from 1962. Operation Chronos, population scale, temporal displacement testing. Cedar Falls hadn't experienced a natural phenomenon. It had been the test site for experimental time manipulation technology, with 2,847 residents serving as unwilling subjects in a classified temporal experiment. The backwards town wasn't an anomaly. It was a laboratory, because sometimes moving forward means understanding what happened when time stood still. This is the story of Cedar Falls, where an entire town lived life in reverse while the government watched from underground. Subscribe to the Ember Files. Some experiments never end.